If you have a dollar bill, take it out. On the back of the dollar bill, you'll see the Great Seal of the United States. On the right is the front of the Great Seal. Now, if you look at the left side, you'll see the Latin words Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means New Order of the Ages. That particular line is an abridgment of a line in Virgil's The Eclogues. Then, if you look on the seal, you'll see another Latin expression. This is from a prayer in Virgil's Aeneid.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. Virgil, the poet Virgil, born 70 BCE, died 19 BCE. What does Virgil have in common? How is he a presence with our founding fathers? That's right, 2,000 years apart, and yet I welcome Robert G. Natelson. Rob Natelson is a former constitutional law professor, classics training, now a senior fellow in constitutional jurisprudence at the Independence Institute in Denver. Rob, a very good evening to you. Virgil and the Revolution. I love the idea you can put them together. How so? Good evening to you, Rob.
Good evening, and it's an honor to be with you. The founders loved Virgil. I mean, I looked at a website called Founders Online, which collects correspondence by only 7 founders, and yet there are nearly 400 references to Virgil in their correspondence. They use Virgil as a source of inspiration, a source of ideas, a source of language. He was very much a presence at the American founding. In fact, I've called him the poet laureate of the American founding.
This is not a man who was spent his life with a sword in his hand. It's not a man who you would find at the ramparts of a revolution. The presentation made by the scholars and the historians is that he was mild, he lived his life in the countryside, and his temperament was one of a retiring person, shy, we would call. That is not inspiration. So how is it that the founders found him? Was it part of their education?
Well, you're absolutely right that he did not follow the normal career of a Roman statesman. I mean, we think of Julius Caesar winning battles over the Gauls and Cicero winning battles in the Senate. That was not Virgil. Virgil got his fame from being a poet, and he got that fame during his lifetime. He became extremely popular in his lifetime. And you're right, it was part of the founders' education. In those days, if you had any hope of eventually being well educated, you started studying Latin and the Latin and Greek classics about age 8. They were, along with the Bible, central pillars of the curriculum. And while the founders read other poets and studied statesmen as well, Virgil was one of their very favorites.
So now we have a secret. What in there is revolutionary? I understand there was an agrarian prejudice. I've always come to Virgil thinking this is about farming, which I enjoy a great deal. However, when I read more, I realize that there's a storyline here. What, not just one, several, but what themes appeal to our founders?
Well, one I think was the agricultural theme. Just for listeners' information, Virgil produced 3 major works. And the second work was called the Georgics. It was a poem of over 2,000 words, and it covered agricultural subjects. Virgil's love for the countryside shines through this poem. And there were many founders who also glorified the countryside, probably most famously Thomas Jefferson. And so that aspect of Virgil appealed to them. Virgil's latest and largest work is called the Aeneid. It's about a military hero named Aeneas who flees Troy while it's being burned by the Greeks, wanders around the Mediterranean, and eventually comes to Italy, where he helps to found the people who later found Rome. Well, this idea of nation building, of leaving what was behind because of disasters, and of founding a new nation, I think that also appealed to the American founders as well. In addition, All of Virgil's poems are filled with these wonderfully quotable lines, and sometimes you'll see a founder writing in a letter or making a speech for or against the Constitution, lifting a line from Virgil because he knew that that line could communicate to the others in the room more powerfully than anything he could say in English.
You had me when you explicated the dollar bill on both sides. Do it for us, Rob.
Sure. If you have a dollar bill, take it out and look at the back. And if on the back of the dollar bill, you'll see the Great Seal of the United States. On the right is the front of the Great Seal. On the back is on the left is the back of the Great Seal. Now, if you look at the left side, you'll see the Latin words Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means New Order of the Ages. That particular line is an abridgment of a line in Virgil's first great collection of poems, the Eclogues. Then if you look on the seal, you'll see another Latin expression, Anquit Coeptes, which means he has approved our undertakings, meaning that God has approved our undertakings. This is from a prayer in Virgil's Aeneid. Now, if you go to the right side of the back part of the bill, you'll see our motto, E pluribus unum, or in English, E pluribus unum. That comes from a poem called The Salad, in Latin Moretum, which Virgil is reputed to have written. We don't really know that he did write it, but we know that during the founders' generation, everybody thought he did. And so that expression comes from a line in this poem, which reads, E pluribus unus. You change the unus to unum, and you've got the American national motto. All three of these expressions on the Great Seal of the United States came from, or reputed to come from, the Roman poet Virgil.
You mentioned Jefferson and Governor Morris. There's so many of the founders here. Was this a secret language between them?
No, not at all. I mean, anyone who was well educated at that time, who, at least among men, studied Latin to such an extent that Latin was really a second language to them. So there was nothing secret about it. I say men because while some women studied Latin, it was more customary among educated women to study the modern languages like Italian and French. But among men, Latin was commonly known. And you can see this again in their correspondence. There'll be a little line which is unattributed or abridged in some way. And anyone who studied Virgil knows that, gee, that came from Virgil.
The Aeneid is a story, it's a romantic tale taking a bit player in the Iliad and turning him into the hero in a quest for a place to live with refugees, which we can identify any time in the last 2,000 years. I'm struck by the fact that Virgil wanted to use it. I never put those things together, or that the revolutionaries of our founders wanted to see themselves as wandering in the wilderness, seeking Rome. Did they think of themselves? I've always thought it was the New Jerusalem, but did they also think of themselves as the New Rome?
Yeah, there were all kinds of references to Rome, or to the creation of Rome as a model for the United States. You could see this particularly in the Constitution crafting process. The upper house of the United States Congress is called the Senate. That term comes from the Latin word Senate. The idea of the mixed constitution was a Roman concept. It was popularized by the Greek historian Polybius and by the great Roman statesman Cicero. This idea of the mixed constitution, it was adopted by our founders. So in many ways, they patterned themselves on Rome. Aeneas is a very interesting character. In the Aeneid, he's sort of the number 4 hero. He's behind Achilles and Hector and Ajax the Greater. And as you say, he doesn't have a major role, but he becomes a hero in the Aeneid, and he's not a hero like Achilles is, who's kind of a savage guy who just likes to kill people. He is a hero who is dutiful to the gods, dutiful to his parents, dutiful to his responsibilities, always tries to do the right thing, sometimes is prevented from doing the right thing. So in a sense, I think of him as a George Washington kind of hero. Military glory, certainly, but also responsiveness to higher duty.
Professor, we have young people listening to us. What would you recommend they begin with? Which of his works?
Well, you've got to really begin by studying Latin. I mean, yeah. Virgil is really a third or more likely a fourth year Latin subject. I would not start with the Georgics. That is particularly difficult. Probably the Eclogues might be a good place to start. They're a series of 10 poems, averaging about 83 lines each. And as you read them, you will recognize aspects of our own culture that you've never really thought much about. So that's where I would recommend starting, but you're not going to be able to really get into it until you've got a few years Latin under your belt.
Rob Natelson, publishing for the Civitas Outlook at Civitas Institute of the University of Texas. I'm John Batchelor.